then I have my relationships, and they do think so.
At 91 years old, Shirley MacLaine has lived through many different chapters of life. She's not just known for her work on screen, but also for everything she's done off camera. As an Oscar-winning actress, best-selling author, spiritual seeker, and someone who always speaks her mind, she has never been afraid to say what she thinks. After nearly 8 decades in Hollywood, MacLaine is looking back with clear eyes, honest words, and a bit of well-earned attitude. In a rare and completely honest interview, she finally shared the names of 7 men in the movie business who really got under her skin. Whether it was because of their huge egos, their lack of respect for others, or just plain cruelty, these actors left a lasting impression on her, and not a good one. From nasty power games to shocking behavior behind the scenes, MacLaine tells it like it is in the way only an old-school star can. And she's not holding back any names. Dean Martin, the sleepwalker. Dean Martin showed up drunk more often than not, MacLaine said with a sigh in her voice that mixed old memories with disappointment that still lingered. When he wasn't drunk, he was distant and emotionally empty. You'd be waiting for a scene to click, waiting for some kind of connection, and all you'd get was that smirking lounge singer smile. It might have worked for Rat Pack parties, but not when you're trying to act in front of a camera. Even though Dean Martin had undeniable charm and old-school appeal, MacLaine remembered that working with him often felt like performing opposite someone who was sleepwalking. His lines would come out with mechanical smoothness, like a singer going through lyrics he'd performed 1,000 times before. She stressed that it wasn't just his lack of preparation that bothered her. It was his lack of presence, his emotional disconnection from what they were doing. Acting is like having a conversation, a give and take, she explained. You throw the ball, and you expect the other person to catch it and throw it back. With Dean, sometimes it felt like the ball just landed on the floor. For an actress known for being emotionally open and intense in her performances, this mismatch was very obvious and frustrating. I live in the moment when I act, MacLaine continued. I'm trying to find the truth in every scene. And when your scene partner is basically just coasting on charm, it leaves you feeling like you're acting into empty space. She understood that Martin's lack of interest might have come from deeper problems. Maybe he was burned out, dealing with grief, or perhaps he never really felt that acting was his true calling. He loved music. He loved golf. He loved hanging out with his friends, she said. But I don't think he ever loved acting. He did it because it was expected of him, because it came easy to him. But when something comes too easy, it doesn't always make you want to work hard at it. There were moments, she admitted, when a spark would appear, when Martin would surprise everyone with a perfectly timed look or unexpected softness in how he delivered a line. But those moments were rare, and you never knew when they might happen. It was like waiting for lightning to strike, she said. And most of the time, the clouds just passed over without anything happening. Still, MacLaine didn't deny that Martin had a mysterious quality that was hard to ignore. He had that special something you can't teach, she said. People liked watching him, even when he wasn't trying very hard. That's the frustrating part. He could have been so much more. She paused, her eyes getting softer. I think part of me wanted to shake him awake, not for the performance, but for the person inside, because I knew he was in there. He just didn't want to come but Anthony Quinn, the steamroller. There was a certain kind of tough guy act he wore like armor, and it got tiring fast, she remembered, her expression getting tight as if she was reliving how exhausting it was. MacLaine was never one to beat around the bush, especially when it came to men who used big, loud behavior to hide their insecurities or need for control. Anthony Quinn, she said, was exactly that type of person, larger than life, loud, and aggressively sure of himself. He walked onto the set like he was doing everyone a favor by showing up, MacLaine recalled. According to her, Quinn was openly dismissive, not just of her, but of most of the cast and crew. He rarely took direction seriously. She said it was as if the only authority he recognized was his own. Directors would give him notes and he'd nod politely, then go ahead and do whatever he wanted anyway. There was no sense of working together, only his need to dominate everything. Rehearsals were particularly annoying. MacLaine remembered him frequently interrupting her lines, talking over her, or changing where he was supposed to stand in the middle of a scene without warning anyone. He didn't see women as equals, and he didn't bother hiding it, she said. He thought if he bulldozed his way through a performance, no one would notice the lack of depth. It wasn't just sexism, she emphasized. It was entitlement, the belief that he deserved special treatment. Everything was a performance for the crew, for the director, for his own ego. She described one particular incident on a 1960s movie set as a perfect example of male entitlement. During an important emotional scene where her character was supposed to confront his with quiet, simmering intensity, Quinn instead chose to be loud and dramatic, raising his voice, taking up space, physically crowding her in the camera frame. I asked the director if we could adjust the dynamic, just give the scene a little more intimacy and balance, she said. Quinn scoffed and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll carry the scene." I remember thinking, you're not carrying anything but your ego. Despite his talent and undeniable screen presence, MacLaine found working with him more exhausting than inspiring. He had charisma, sure, and he knew how to fill a screen, but filling a screen isn't the same as sharing it. And he never truly shared a scene with you. He just occupied it. Over time, she learned how to stand her ground. You have to when you're around men like that. They'll bulldoze you otherwise. So I learned to push back, not just for myself, but for the integrity of the work. You can't make real art if you're constantly fighting for basic respect. Still, she recognized there was complexity behind all that bravado. I think he was afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid that if he let his guard down, he wouldn't be enough. So he overcompensated. And maybe that was the real tragedy. Not that he was difficult, but that he never trusted anyone enough to just be human. Robert Mitchum, the bitter star. Bob Mitchum had this dangerous appeal, that lazy, smoldering look, the voice like gravel mixed with whiskey. He had a presence you couldn't ignore, MacLaine acknowledged. But what people don't know is how bitter he could be. Her admiration for Mitchum's talent was real, but it came with a warning. For all the magnetism he brought to the screen, she said his energy on set was often more harmful than helpful. There was this constant undercurrent of resentment with Bob, she said. He walked around like the world had done him wrong, like every moment spent acting was somehow beneath him. It was as if he thought the industry owed him not just respect, but complete submission. And when he didn't get it, he'd punish everyone with his indifference. MacLaine remembered that working with him often felt like walking through a minefield of bad moods. You'd be trying to do something honest, something emotionally true, and he'd undercut it with a smirk, a muttered insult, or just complete disengagement. He made everyone feel small just so he could feel big. He rarely spoke unless it was to make a sarcastic comment or question why a scene was necessary. If the director gave notes, Bob would roll his eyes. If the script called for vulnerability, he'd act like it was a joke. And if another actor had a big moment, he'd find a way to suck the energy out of it, usually by acting like none of it mattered. MacLaine described the atmosphere as emotionally paralyzing, especially for those who weren't as experienced or willing to fight back. There was a heaviness whenever he walked into a room, she said. It wasn't about fear exactly. It was more like dread. Like you knew the temperature would drop, the tension would rise, and whatever good energy had been building would just disappear. She didn't deny that Mitchum had his moments, flashes of brilliance that reminded everyone why he had become a legend in the first place. When he was engaged, he could be magnetic. There was no one quite like him when he decided to show up emotionally. But those moments were so rare, they felt like accidents. Still, MacLaine expressed some understanding. He was a product of a brutal era. Men like Bob weren't allowed to be soft, to ask for help, or show pain. So they drank, they lashed out, they carried this armor of bitterness. I think he was deeply unhappy. And the tragedy is that he never let himself heal. She paused thoughtfully, then added, "Talent doesn't excuse behavior, but it does make you mourn the loss more deeply, because you see what could have been, what he could have been, if he just let himself be vulnerable." Frank Sinatra, the controller. I never trusted Frank, MacLaine said bluntly, without hesitation or apology. He could be charming, absolutely, but it was transactional. It was charm with strings attached. If you weren't useful to him in that moment, you didn't exist. There was no mistaking the complicated tone in her voice, a mix of awe, frustration, and something like disappointment. She wasn't denying Sinatra's magnetism. No one could. But she refused to make it seem more romantic than it was. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, she said. And then the next day, you'd be invisible. It all depended on what he needed from you and whether you were willing to go along with his rules. For MacLaine, who valued honesty and working together as artists, that kind of emotional whiplash was not only exhausting but damaging. She remembered one particularly tense shoot with Sinatra that seemed to constantly be on the edge of falling apart. He stormed off set more than once, she said. Just walked right out when things didn't go his way. It could be over anything. A line reading, the lighting, a delay in filming. The man didn't like being told what to do. Not by directors, not by co-stars, and certainly not by a woman. What struck MacLaine most wasn't just Sinatra's unpredictable behavior, but the way people enabled it. There was a whole infrastructure around him, producers, assistants, hangers-on whose sole purpose was to keep him from being uncomfortable. They'd scramble to adjust everything for Frank. It was like he was royalty, and we were all just there to orbit around him. That imbalance wasn't just professional, it was personal too. You couldn't have a real conversation with him. Everything was filtered through power dynamics. He believed power was a right, not a responsibility. And when someone lives that way for too long, though, I stopped seeing people. They only see tools or obstacles. Despite all this, MacLaine acknowledged Sinatra's talent and cultural impact. He could deliver a song or a line with such skill it would stop you cold. That was real. But the cost of that brilliance was this atmosphere of tension, of walking on eggshells. The work suffered for it, and so did the people. She didn't shy away from the fact that Sinatra had his loyal followers. Some people worshipped him, and he rewarded that loyalty if it served him. But God help you if you pushed back. If you tried to meet him as an equal, especially as a woman, he'd make sure you knew your place. MacLaine took a breath, measured and thoughtful. I've worked with difficult people before. I've even respected some of them. But Frank, I don't miss working with him. Not for a second. You can admire someone's talent and still know they weren't good for you or for anyone else. Warren Beatty, The Broken Promise. This one hurts, she admitted, her voice softer than usual, touched with something that sounded like regret. Warren had promised, no doubt, but he was insufferable about it. For Shirley MacLaine, the memory of working with Warren Beatty was more complicated than most. There had been early friendship, even admiration, and for a time she truly believed in his potential, not just as an actor, but as a creative force in the industry. He was electric in the beginning, she said. Sharp, ambitious, undeniably talented. You could see it in flashes, the way he shaped a scene, the instincts he had for story and timing. But talent, when not balanced by humility, can turn into something ugly. And with Beatty, that's exactly what happened. MacLaine didn't avoid talking about the reality of what it was like to work with him. He couldn't share the spotlight. Everything had to orbit around him. Scripts, camera angles, even conversation. You'd be mid-sentence, mid-thought, and he'd steer the moment back to himself like gravity pulling everything toward the sun. Except in this case, the sun burned too hot and too fast. The disappointment in her tone wasn't just about ego or frustration. It was deeper than that. She had seen what he was capable of and watched it twist under the weight of self-importance. There's nothing wrong with confidence, but Warren took it to a level that left no space for anyone else. Collaboration became control. Input became interference. You never quite knew whether he was listening or just waiting to speak. She remembered times on set when creative decisions turned into standoffs. He had to win no matter what the cost, and it wasn't about the best idea, it was about his idea. He'd question the director, override blocking, rewrite scenes on the fly, and if you didn't go along with it, you were the problem. Even in casual conversation, Beatty's need to dominate the room was relentless. You could feel him performing even when no one was watching. Still, she never denied his brilliance. He was brilliant and broken, she said quietly. That's what made it so tragic. You wanted to root for him. You wanted to believe he could rise above himself, but he never did. Or maybe he couldn't. When asked if she'd ever work with him again, MacLaine didn't hesitate. No, not even for the best script in the world. Some lessons don't need repeating. You can care about someone's gifts and still protect yourself from their chaos. She paused, then added with a trace of lingering sadness, I wanted him to be the man his potential promised. But sometimes potential is just that. A promise never kept. Charlton Heston. The God complex. God complex. That's what he had, McLaine said, her tone dry and unforgiving. She was talking about one of Hollywood's most famously serious leading men, a giant of the screen known for his gravity and impenetrable manner. He thought he was Moses, even when the cameras stopped rolling. She wasn't exaggerating. For McLaine, working with him was like stepping into a church where only one person was allowed to speak. Everything was sacred to him. Every line, every pause, every piece of blocking, she said. But not in a way that invited you in. It wasn't about elevating the material. It was about elevating himself. She described him as condescending and humorless, especially when others tried to bring spontaneity or warmth into a scene. You try to bring something light, something human into the moment, and he'd bulldoze it with seriousness and self-importance. It was like trying to dance with a statue. What might have played as strength on camera often came across as rigidity in real life. The man never met a mirror he didn't love, she added with a dry smile. And I don't just mean physically. He was in love with his own moral reflection. McLaine said there was little room for genuine collaboration. Suggestions were often met with a patronizing nod, or a long-winded sermon about the higher purpose of the scene, the film, or cinema itself. He spoke like he was delivering a message from God, she said. Even when we were just doing a basic two-person dialogue, he'd carry himself like he was descending from Mount Sinai. What made it worse, she noted, was that his righteousness extended beyond the set. It wasn't just about acting, it was everything. How the crew addressed him, where his chair was placed, what kind of water was in his trailer. And if anything fell short, he took it as a personal insult to the sanctity of his presence. Despite his stature and the critical acclaim that followed him, McLaine found working with him deeply frustrating. There was no give, no curiosity, no sense of play. Acting is about listening, reacting, being surprised. But with him, it felt like everything had already been decided in his head. Your job was just to orbit around his choices. And yet, she acknowledged his performances had a power that audiences responded to. There's something to be said for conviction, for certainty. He had that in abundance, but it came at the cost of real connection. He didn't act with you, he acted at you. When asked if there had ever been a moment of breakthrough between them, she shook her head. Not really. I don't think he ever saw me. Not truly. He saw a co-star, a line partner, maybe even a rival, but never an equal. She paused, then finished. Great actor, terrible collaborator. There's a difference. Steve McQueen. The Locked Door. Steve was cool. Too cool for connection, McLaine said, her voice tinged with both admiration and quiet frustration. The world saw Steve McQueen as the ultimate rebel. A man with a motorcycle, a squint, and an aura of danger that translated effortlessly to the screen. But for McLaine, who worked alongside him, that surface of effortless cool came with a cost. He had edge, he had style, but emotionally, there was a void. Though she respected his precision and presence, she found herself constantly searching for something deeper during their scenes, something human, vulnerable, real. He didn't talk, he didn't engage, and when he did, it was clipped and cold. I don't think he ever really listened. Not in the way you hope a scene partner will. There was no sense of give and take, no curiosity, just stone. That emotional distance, she believed, was intentional. Steve had complete control over how much of himself he let people see, and the answer was not much. Everything felt calculated, every movement, every word. You could admire the control, sure I did, but it made real connection almost impossible. She compared acting with him to dancing with a locked door. You'd step in, open yourself up, offer a moment, and there'd be nothing back. No flicker of recognition, no surprise, no response, just that impenetrable stillness. And while it worked beautifully on camera, it left you as a scene partner feeling like you were acting in empty space. Still, McLaine didn't question his magnetism. He had a natural camera sense, a kind of internal rhythm that made him hypnotic to watch. But that rhythm didn't include anyone else. It was like he was performing a solo no matter how many people were in the frame. She remembered moments off set where the distance remained firmly in place. He wasn't unkind, just inaccessible. You'd try to talk to him between takes and get one-word answers, maybe a nod. He didn't waste energy on small talk, on bonding, on anything that felt messy or emotional. It was all about control. What puzzled her most was how someone with such a guarded exterior could move audiences so powerfully. "That's the mystery of Steve McQueen," she said. "He barely let anyone in, yet millions of people felt like they knew him. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe people projected what they wanted onto him. But I never got past that wall." Would she work with him again? Professionally, yes, because he delivered. But personally, I'd rather act with someone who meets you halfway, who wants to build something together, not just guard their own space. She paused, then added with a dry smile, "He was cool, no doubt, but cool gets cold real fast when you're looking for heat." Final reflections. Shirley MacLaine has always been more than just a star. She's been a mirror to Hollywood's changing face, and now, in her 9th decade, she's offering a clear reflection of what she saw behind the curtain. "You don't make it this long by pretending everything was fine," she said. "Some of it was ugly. Some of them were too. These weren't just professional complaints or petty grievances. They were observations from someone who spent decades working alongside some of the most celebrated men in Hollywood, watching talent wrestle with ego, insecurity, and power. Her stories reveal not just individual personalities, but the culture that created and enabled them. A culture where difficult behavior was often excused if it came wrapped in enough talent and box office appeal. MacLaine's willingness to name names and share these stories isn't about settling old scores. It's about honesty, the kind of honesty that comes with age, experience, and the freedom of no longer needing to play the Hollywood game. At 91, she's earned the right to speak her truth, even when that truth isn't pretty. These 7 men, Dean Martin, Anthony Quinn, Robert Mitchum, Frank Sinatra, Warren Beatty, Charlton Heston, and Steve McQueen, were all legends in their own right. They created memorable performances and left lasting marks on cinema history. But MacLaine's accounts remind us that talent and success don't automatically make someone easy to work with, or even a good person. Her stories also highlight the particular challenges faced by women in Hollywood during those decades: the dismissiveness, the power games, the assumption that male egos took precedence over collaboration and respect. Yet through it all, MacLaine not only survived, but thrived, learning to stand her ground while maintaining her integrity and commitment to her craft. Perhaps most importantly, her willingness to tell these stories serves as a reminder that behind the glamour and mythology of Hollywood's golden age were real people dealing with real problems, and that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is simply tell the truth about what you experienced, even when that truth is uncomfortable.